Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we cut through the noise to deliver the core knowledge you need. Today we're getting into the really intense strategy behind urban renewal and organizational growth. We're going to be unpacking a major framework from a pivotal lecture on how you can reach and sustain change in global cities.
Yeah, and this source material is, well, it's incredibly comprehensive. It moves past the simple motivation, which, is often the easy part. This really provides a full operating system. It's built around three critical questions.
The why, the what, and the how.
Exactly. The deep, compelling why you must focus on cities, the essential what you need to know about urban life, and then the strategic how you build a self-sustaining ecosystem for lasting impact.
Right. And it's an explicit acknowledgement that this kind of work is just extraordinarily challenging. You need more than just good intentions. You need these really strong goads or reasons to stick with it.
Yeah,
So our mission today is to give you the complete shortcut to understanding this entire strategic model. We'll focus on the biblical, the sociological, and the practical foundations that really define success in these complex urban centers. Okay, let's unpack this, starting with that simple foundational question. Why even prioritize the city at all?
Well, the motivation begins, maybe surprisingly, not with a demographic report,
Okay.
but with a really nuanced look at the role of the city throughout history, specifically biblical history.
And what's so interesting there is that cities, they actually start out as problem sites in that narrative. Cain builds the first city. You have the ambition of the Tower of Babel. It's human nature writ large and often for the worse. But as the story moves on, cities become absolutely central to the story of redemption. You think about Jerusalem, the command to seek the peace of Babylon, and of course, St. Paul basing his entire missionary strategy around these urban centers.
So the Bible is very realistic. It sees both human depravity and the image of God side by side. But it constantly shows just how crucial it is to engage the city.
And that biblical significance is perfectly matched by modern global influence. I mean, if you're concerned about global economics, culture, social systems, which you should be, you just have to prioritize the urban environment. That's where the world is being shaped.
It is. And this is where it gets really interesting, especially with the economics.
The numbers are just staggering.
Yeah. The sources point out that if you take just the 100 largest global cities,
The top 100.
the top 100, they produce about 30% of the world's economy. But here's the kicker. They produce almost 100% of the world's innovation.
Oh.
And because of technology and globalization, ideas that start in one global city, they spread almost instantly. So in essence, the world has become urban, whether you physically live there or not.
Which makes cities this inevitable nexus for all the key demographics, and that's crucial for any strategy of engagement. Younger adults disproportionately gravitate towards cities, cultural influencers are concentrated there, and critically, cities are a magnet for the poor.
And that attraction of the poor is so often misinterpreted. People see it as a sign of failure or weakness.
Right.
But the source points to Edward Claser's work, his book, The Triumph of the City. He argues that cities don't really produce poverty so much as they attract people who are escaping rural poverty.
That's a huge distinction.
It's a key distinction. See, rural poverty is often inescapable. It lacks opportunities. The city, on the other hand, it offers prospects. So having a large population of lower-income people, according to this analysis, actually demonstrates the city's core strength. It attracts people with the ambition and the risk-taking spirit to move long distances for a chance to change their lives. That ambition is crucial human capital.
And this concentration of people, it also means that cities are essential for any kind of global outreach. I mean, previously inaccessible people groups are now literally right down the street in our own metropolises.
But the final why is maybe the most immediate, the most urgent one.
Yeah.
And that's just the sheer speed of demographic growth. Just 250 years ago, only 5% of the world lived in cities. Today, we're comfortably past 50%.
And the velocity of that change it's just hard to get your head around. We are talking about 5 million people moving into global cities every single month.
Every month.
If you try to visualize that. I mean, a city like Rio de Janeiro is about 10 million people. So globally, the world is adding the equivalent of a brand new Rio every 2 months.
And that velocity leads right to the core challenge. The sources argue that based on these metrics, we are falling critically behind. The demand requires thousands of new urban organizations monthly just to keep pace, but the sobering assessment is that cities are currently the least well-served places in the world.
So if you don't have these strong, compelling reasons to justify how hard the work is, you're just not going to stick with it.
You simply won't.
Okay, that velocity is terrifying. And the why gives you that deep compelling fuel. But fuel alone won't get you there. You need a map.
Exactly. Motivation is vital, but it's not enough. So the second major step in this framework addresses the what, the specific knowledge and expertise you need to operate successfully in such a complex urban environment. And this breaks down into three foundations.
And the first is developing that biblical theology of the city we mentioned earlier, one that can handle the complexity of both the city of man and the ultimate city of God.
Right. And the source stresses that you need dedicated study here because that sophisticated literature is, frankly, often underdeveloped. But the second foundation is understand the principle of constant change.
Okay, so when the source says constant change,
Yeah.
are we just talking about gentrification, or is this something deeper, more systemic to the urban experience?
Oh, it's much deeper. It's systemic. Cities are defined by three sociological constants that guarantee this perpetual change. The first is human capital. Cities are magnets for the most ambitious, adventurous, risk-taking people. The second is, well, it's a bit of a technical term, agglomeration.
Agglomeration. Okay, let's pause on that. Break that down first. What does that actually mean in plain language?
It's the sociological term for density, for people living in extreme close proximity. But the implication is profound. You take ambitious people, that's human capital. You put them in a confined space, that's agglomeration. And the friction of their ideas bumping into one another becomes this perpetual engine of innovation. And that's the third constant.
So those three forces guarantee the city will never stay the same.
Never. Which means your strategy can't be static either.
And this rapid reinvention is why anyone basing their strategy on the city of, say, 20 or 30 years ago is just working with obsolete data. We used to have the simple donut city model, right? Poor centers surrounded by wealthy suburbs.
That's largely obsolete now. We deal with reverse commuters, people who live in the expensive, revitalized downtown core, but they commute out to jobs in these sprawling, multi-ethnic suburbs. The great danger for any leader is basing their strategy on an assumption of what their neighborhood was like a decade ago. You have to be constantly tracking the changes right outside your door.
Which brings us to the third foundational area of knowledge, the specific characteristics of effective urban churches. And these organizations have to be distinct to really fit the urban environment. The first trait is extreme cultural awareness.
And this is a really challenging insight for anyone who comes from a dominant culture. The source suggests that people from a majority culture often assume there's a neutral way to do anything.
Yeah.
A neutral way to resolve conflicts, schedule events, choose music, but there is no neutral way.
Interesting.
So urban ministry requires leaders to actively move past that belief that their way is simply the way things are done. And they have to expect and be patient with the necessary tension that comes up in truly multi-ethnic settings.
Okay, next, there has to be a deep commitment to justice and the neighborhood. A lot of people are drawn to cities today because they're consumer cities or urban theme parks. They come for the amenities, but they treat the neighborhood as a place to be entertained, not a place to invest in.
Right. So an effective urban church has to counter that. They have to show neighbors they are actively working to make the community better for everyone, regardless of belief. And this includes being aware of the invisible problems, like kids being boozed into local public schools from much poorer areas, or the needs of residents in nearby public housing, even right in the middle of a gentrified area.
So if justice is what you do for the neighborhood, the source suggests that integrating faith and work is about how you approach your industry. That's the next point, faith and work integration. City dwellers are highly ambitious. They're logging 50 to 70 hours a week. So if the gospel only applies to Sunday, well, it's irrelevant to 80% of their life.
It fails the urban stress test. The church has to show the profound impact of faith on their daily vocation, their careers, their industry.
Then there's the complexity of evangelism. The strategy just can't be one size fits all. Give us that great example from the source about the different challenges in London.
Right. In London, for instance, leaders face two completely different non-Christian groups. On one hand, you have Muslims and Hindus who think Christians are morally licentious. On the other hand, you have secular Brits who think Christians are too moralistic and judgmental. So you need at least two distinct gospel presentations to address those opposing, deeply ingrained stereotypes.
And fifth is urban sensibility. This is about acknowledging that the traditional suburban preference for, privacy, safety, order, homogeneity, that has to be challenged.
It does. Urban centers often thrive on risk, diversity, irony, chaos, unpredictability. And leaders just can't ignore or despise these differences if they hope to reach the native or, the fully urbanized population.
And finally, artistry and artists.
Yeah, urban churches need to have a higher bar for artistry, and they must enfranchise artists. They need to be treated as essential community members and vision casters, not just as slave labor for graphics and music.
That is a very demanding blueprint for knowledge and culture. Okay, so now we get to the practical strategy. The how. How do we take all that sophisticated knowledge and turn it into a sustained movement?
The how is defined by this analogy of the gospel ecosystem. Think of a biological system where all the components are characterized by mutual interdependence.
Okay.
The goal isn't just building individual successful churches, it's about catalyzing a movement that is self-sustaining. And it's defined by 3 concentric rings.
So if we're picturing these rings, what's at the absolute center?
Ring 1 is the core foundation, the theological vision. And this is more than just shared doctrine. It requires consensus on how to communicate and embody that doctrine in the specific cultural context of the city at this specific time.
So it's an agreement on the basic concept of how to get the biblical gospel out into the world.
Precisely, which flows directly into Ring 2, the foundational structure of the movement, church planting movements. This is where those sheer numbers come into play because of that terrifying demographic growth we talked about.
Right.
Exactly. Historical data shows that density is key. If a city has only one church for every 10,000 residents, attendance is typically only about 1%. But if you can drive that ratio down to one church for every 500 residents, attendance can surge to 40%.
Wow. So to keep pace, the only way is to start thousands of new urban structure.
It's the only way. And this necessity leads to the source's controversial but necessary point, the need for diversity across various traditions within the movement.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, the source argues that God honors movements from various traditions, Presbyterian, Anglican, Pentecostal, Baptist, because no single tradition or denomination can appeal to every segment of the diverse urban population. If you want a broad reach, you need all of them working together.
But doesn't that pursuit of diversity undermine the essential theological vision in Ring 1? I mean, how do you manage that tension without sacrificing core doctrine?
Well, that's the challenge of true collaboration, isn't it? The vision in Ring 1 has to be deep enough to allow for broad tactical freedom in Ring 2. The core doctrine remains. But leaders have to operate with great humility, recognizing that, we've all got something wrong. The unity of the mission in the face of this overwhelming urban need has to outweigh those denominational differences.
And Ring 2 is so essential because the local church is the spiritual and financial engine for everything else.
They're the funder. The church is the only ministry that, after the initial startup phase, becomes self-supporting within a few years. And that allows it to fund all the other specialized ministries in the city. They provide the community and the spiritual oxygen.
Which brings us to Ring 3, this necessary network of specialist ministries, all working in close collaboration with the local churches. The source details 6 of them. Let's start with what builds the unity.
The foundation of unity is the United Prayer Movement. It has to be cross-denominational, cross-racial. And it often serves as the genesis point for all the other initiatives. It breaks down barriers.
Okay, moving outward, we have Justice and Mercy Ministries.
And these must be citywide efforts, pooling resources from multiple churches to tackle large-scale needs that no single church could handle on its own.
This is immediately followed by specialist evangelism and faith and work initiatives. And those faith and work initiatives seem crucial for that ambitious human capital group.
Absolutely. These are citywide vocational fellowships for, say, journalists, artists, or finance people. They're designed to open doors, provide mentorship, and develop theological wisdom that's relevant to their specific fields.
And a key part of that specialist evangelism is a heavy emphasis on campus ministry in cities.
Yes, because unlike students who leave town after graduation, students in urban campus ministries can graduate, find jobs, and stay rooted in the city. This creates an immediate, ongoing leadership pipeline. They're already accustomed to the city's challenges.
And finally, we need structures to sustain the whole movement long term, institutions supporting family life.
Most obviously, urban Christian schools that are concerned with the welfare of both Christian and non-Christian neighbors.
And ministry training pipelines.
Yeah, this means establishing local training that provides urban training specifically. You can't just rely on importing leaders from outside the city context who then require years of expensive retraining.
And tying all 3 rings together, making sure the ecosystem doesn't just turn into a collection of warring kingdoms, is the need for unified leadership.
Every leader has to commit to unity and a profound lack of turf consciousness to avoid that infighting.
So when all 3 rings are fully integrated, The shared vision, the diverse church planting movement, and the specialized unified ministries.
The system hits a gospel movement tipping point.
A tipping point, and that's spontaneous growth. It starts growing under its own power,
Hmm.
no central command, no external money needed. It begins to grow faster than the overall population.
And the ultimate aspiration is the city tipping point. This is when the movement starts to actually alter the way the city's culture operates. And the sources give this fascinating, specific social threshold for this.
What is it?
The city tipping point is reached when the average resident knows and respects one Orthodox evangelical Christian.
Wow. That is a remarkable concrete metric. If that threshold is reached, it breaks the stereotype, making the faith a viable option for a majority of the population.
It creates cultural credibility where there was previously skepticism or outright contempt.
So what does this all mean? This whole strategic framework is presented as building an altar. It's the necessary human effort to catalyze an ecosystem and then, wait for a larger spiritual change. But here's the provocative thought for you to consider, based on that terrifying velocity we unpacked earlier. The source notes that the church is falling behind because city growth is so rapid, we're adding the equivalent of a new 10 million person city every 2 months globally. If human life is increasingly determined by the systems and culture of cities, what are the broader implications of this consistent lag? If the institutions that aim to serve the poor and build community are consistently years or even decades behind the growth curve, what is the fate of the social, infrastructural, and cultural stability in these rapidly forming metropolises? What critical shifts need to happen beyond just the church to address that demographic velocity and the consistent cultural lag that follows?
That's a profound challenge that moves far beyond any single organization's strategy.
Indeed. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We'll see you next time.